So today what I want to talk to you about is why education creates opportunities for everybody. It certainly did for me. I grew up in a really small town in southern Oregon. There were lots of really big, tall, green pine trees, not that many people. And my parents were hippies. They were children of the 60s, and they would fill my head with stories about being engaged in the civil rights movement. And I really longed to be part of something so exciting, help fight injustice and be part of something bigger than myself, something important. So as I was growing up, all the rest of the girls in my school would listen to Prince, and me and my friends, we would dress up in my parents' old hippie clothes and listen to the Beatles. And when I got to college, I started learning about women around the world and how many of them were not able to exercise their rights. Women living in different parts of the world who were raped would be thrown in jail. Women who were forbidden from voting. Women who are not able to hold public office. And I thought I found my calling. I was like, I want to be an international human rights lawyer. I want to travel around the world and fight injustice and work for the United Nations. I was really naive. But I actually got lucky. Right after college, I landed a gig working for the United Nations. And I was helping on really interesting projects. Some of the projects were helping to put laws on the books to help protect women from spousal abuse and sexual exploitation. And I could kind of see my whole career folding before me. I would go to law school, I'd work in international human rights, until I talked to some women refugees, the women whose these very laws were supposed to protect. And you know what they told me? They said, Rebecca, thank you for helping putting these laws on the books. Those are going to be really good, maybe one day. The current laws aren't even enforced, but we hope they will help one day. But you know what we really need? We need to learn how to read and write. They explained how, many of them were living in families with controlling husbands. Some of their husbands were abusive, and if they just knew how to read and write, they felt they could make their way in the world. They could have some independence. They could start a business. Whoops. How's this? Am I back? And that blew my mind. Just like that, poof, my dream of becoming an international human rights lawyer vanished. Because in all honesty, I had never, ever considered what it might be like not to be able to read and write. How small my world would be, how confined I would be. It was so fundamental to who I was, the power to understand the world, to name it through written word. Because I, like all of you, I'm guessing, have had a really good education. I mean, I thank you to my high school, Ashland High School. I thank you to my college, Swarthmore College. Thank you to my graduate studies, Columbia University. But I'm not alone. I think all of you are here in this room today because you've had an education. Am I right? I bet there's not a single person in this room who doesn't know how to read and write. TEDx is for an educated crowd. But you know what? We are really, really the lucky few. Now, I want you guys to indulge me. I know it's dark in the audience, but I want you to do something for me. All of you who have been born in the first half of the year between January through June, if your birthday is through January through June, could you just stand up? Just stand up right now. Actually, a lot of you are born between January through June. So just look around. All of you guys represent the 136 million children around the world who should be in primary school, who should be in lower secondary school but aren't, and the kids who are in school, about 200 million of them, who are in such poor quality schools that they're barely able to learn how to read and write. You can sit down now. None of you guys asked to be born in the first half of the year, it just happened. We don't choose where and when we're born. Just like those kids didn't choose to be born in the poorest countries of the world, and through no fault of their own are part of the great uneducated. So the real question we have to talk about today is, who are these kids? And why aren't they getting a good education? By and large, these kids are the poorest kids in the poorest countries in the world. They live in rural areas, and many of them are girls. And the truth is, all is not gloom and doom when we talk about global education. Actually, in the last 6 to 7 decades, there has been a profound transformation. Education now is for the masses. Everywhere in the world, young people, children, youth, parents, teachers, community leaders, government advocates, all demand education for their children. And that certainly has not been the case. For centuries and centuries, education really was just for the elite. And today, more than any time in the world, more kids are in school than ever before. So that's something to celebrate. But as we look to the future and think about the power of education and the power of education for all people, we have 2 twin global challenges. The first is equity, getting the most marginalized kids into school. And the second is quality, making sure that once kids are in school, even if they're in poor rural areas, they're learning well. So let me take the case of Nigeria. Nigeria is not the worst country in the world, not the best. On average, kids get about 6.7 years of school. And that's a national average. But the numbers start looking really different when you start looking at different slices of the population. Let's take the rich and the poor. So if you are in the richest 20% of people in Nigeria, you can probably almost finish your education, almost a full 10 years. However, if you are in the poorest 20%, on average, you're only going to get 3.5 years of education. What else? Let's look at urban versus rural. If you're in the poorest 20% of the population and you live in an urban area, you're almost going to get, on average, 6.5 years of school versus the 3.3 if you live in a rural area. Now let's look at gender. If you're poor, you live in a rural area, you're a girl, you on average are only going to get 2.6 years of school. And here's the kicker. If you're an ethnic minority, like the Hausa in Nigeria, if you're poor, you live in a rural area, you're a girl, you're part of the Hausa minority, you get 0.3 years of school on average. I mean, that's just like a couple months. I mean, this whole picture pisses me off. I mean, it's so unfair. Like, where is the rules on the books in Nigeria that says if you're wealthy, you can almost complete your education? But if you're poor, you live in a rural area, you're a girl, you're part of an ethnic minority, you're screwed. You're totally screwed. And that is, you know, these fundamental inequities is something that get reflected in country after country, not just Nigeria. They also take on a whole other dimension when we start looking at quality. Now, I'm going to take the case of the Gambia. There's lots of kids who do get into school, but when they're there, they have a really hard time even learning basic literacy skills. A couple of years ago, across the country in Gambia, students took a reading test, first, second, and third grade students. Here's some basic sentences that were on the reading test. There were more basic sentences, you know, good morning, my name is, etc. Now, of the first graders who took that test, 80% of them could not recognize a single word. Of the second graders, 66% of them could not recognize a single word. Of the third graders, half of the third graders who took this test could not recognize a single word. I mean, a single word, a, the, I, my name is, good morning, which they say every day. This is really fundamentally quite scary. It's particularly scary when we think about the inequities between poor countries and rich countries. Because on average, the learning achievement of students in poor countries barely reaches the learning achievement of the worst students in rich countries. So An average student in a poor country, not the worst student in the class, not the best, on average, learns about the same amount as the worst 5% of students in rich countries. Now, if we think about what type of opportunities education gives to people in a globalized world, we should be really frightened by this slide. Because we know that when a girl in rural Nigeria gets educated, a lot of people benefit. She benefits, she becomes healthier, she becomes wealthier over the course of her life. Her kids benefit, they live longer. Her communities benefit, they become more prosperous. And you know who else benefits? We do. Research shows that in places around we live in a globalized world. Health epidemics flow across borders. Economic markets flow across borders. Security threats. And education levels make all of us more prosperous, healthier, safer. So we should all be really concerned about the really low levels of education around the world, because education really does benefit everybody. And that's ultimately why I'm an education fanatic. And I know, whoa, she's going crazy up there. She sounds kind of loony. But I really do believe that all kids everywhere should have a good quality education. And I want you guys to be education fanatics too. I really do. In fact, that's the first thing I would ask you to do. I want you to, spread the word that education for all kids is really important. And not just any education, a good quality education. An education where kids can learn basic literacy skills at the beginning of school. Because let's face it, if you don't know how to read and write, you're going to have a really hard time with your geography lesson, your math lesson, your social studies as things progress. But literacy is just the tip of the iceberg. We need our kids and our youth to master all sorts of skills and to develop all sorts of capacities, critical thinking, citizenship. And that's really, really important. And I have a friend who always says something that rings true to me. My friend Gene Sperling, he always says, and he cares deeply about kids here in this country and kids abroad, and he says, anytime people don't care about quality education for children, they're talking about other people's children. They're never talking about their own children. And I think we should remember that. The second thing that I want you guys to do is to think really carefully about the solutions to the problems of equity and quality. There are lots of education strategies out there. And I want you to laser focus on the ones that help bring marginalized kids into school, that help particularly poor schools improve learning. And there are solutions out there that work. Bringing schools closer to children, recruiting teachers from marginalized communities, supporting and training teachers how to teach reading, providing students with reading materials that are appropriate for their age level. These are all solutions that have proven to work, and there's many others. And in fact, in the Gambia, they've tried a number of these solutions. And in a few short years, the reading levels of their kids in school have increased greatly. And the last thing that I want you to do is really to spread the word. Spread the word that education creates opportunities for everybody. Because after all, if a rural girl in Nigeria gets an education, not only does she benefit, but we all end up benefiting. Thank you.